Welcome back, everyone. And it's been a while since the last video, but that's because I've been playing a lot of chess lately, and I have some good news to share with you all in that I'm finally an international chess master. So today, I actually want to go over two of the games that led me there. One in particular, the one that got me the title, and another interesting duel between me and Tomas Sosa, a grandmaster from Argentina. So, as we get to it, I want to tell you the story and the opening of the game against Jose, and then I'll show you the whole game against Thomas later. So, what happened was I was pretty close to the title for a long time, been fluctuating between 2350 and 2400, but never quite getting there. So finally, I was around 2390, and I got to play this interesting Spanish international master, Garcia Jose. And for this game, I was not expecting the opening that actually happened, which was a London. I was looking into King's Indian setups. I was looking into everything else except for the London. As for the London, I thought, okay, we'll figure it out. I knew some setups that Black can go for, and we'll wing it when it comes to it, which is exactly what happened. Because we went for this double fianchetto system where White's bishop is still firing in London-like manner, but at least the two black bishops can compensate and fire as well on the long diagonals. So Jose decided to take the center into his own hands because if Black is playing very liberally like this and giving away all the space, he might as well take it, is White's logic here. But I want to say that his center is weakened because usually the pawn's supposed to be on c3, right, in the London. As for here, that's not the case. So the whole diagonal gives me something to work with. If they keep the pawn here, my simple plan is something like takes and push, either right now or a bit later, because I can start off with this and then include d5. So I think black is doing totally fine here because very soon the second knight will come out and they have this isolated pawn triangle that we are out to attack. Okay, so that was the plan, and I was trying to figure out what happens after, let's say, takes with the knight. But then he gives up the center that he worked so hard to get, right? So we should probably just castle and take out the other knight and live happily ever after. We can try to go for an early d5, but then the bishop can see the light of day again. And I don't want this bishop to have any more squares than he needs to, which is why we should probably keep the pawn on d6 and just play in hedgehog fashion, right? Okay, so then in the actual game, he went for the critical reply d5, and we have some sort of weird Benko gambit, right? Where black already has a bishop on b7, and they're trying to break down this center. It's actually not a bad rendition. It's not a bad version of the Benko, because if they take, we're of course very happy, and if they don't take, then I can either take or better was even castle and just keep the pressure so that if this knight ever comes out, then I can look into b4 and say, where is the knight going? Because that's not the happiest knight in the universe, right? And then my knight's coming to e4, so this would be pretty great. Okay, so that's what I was hoping to get, but I also decided to break down the center right away with b takes c. Okay, so I could have waited a bit longer and castled, but I said, wait a second. If I take and they take, isn't that bishop just bad here? Because very soon the second knight is coming to gang up on that poor little pawn who's all alone on d5. Okay? Instead, of course, Jose waits to pick up the pawn later, takes out the knight. I say, let's aim for a dragon. And the dragon bishop is firing from g7 there. So we have a typical sort of pawn structure for black. And white decides to go for the center. At one point or other, they have to safeguard the pawn, right? Because this pawn's pretty weak, so they might as well give it some coverage. And this knight needs to go to d2 and c4 because that's where the knight belongs. He doesn't really do much here. He wants to be on c4 on his magical outpost, even aiming for a5 one day, especially if my knight comes here. During the game, I was actually worried about lines like this. So if I castle, he brings the knight here. I bring my knight here. He takes the pawn. I ask the knight a question, and the knight comes all the way to a5. So I wasn't sure what to do here because if the bishop comes back, then knight c6 could be a little annoying since I don't have the open file anymore. Even this is playable, but I should probably avoid it. So that's what I did. My plan was to meet knight d2 with knight b6 and say you're not getting the pawn easily. Okay. Now Jose goes for something a bit weird in my eyes because he decides to trade off the Benko bishop or whatever bishop you like to call him, maybe a dragon, and then the knight still needs the square to get the pawn. But it's a bit time expensive, right? Because he has to waste all the time with all the backwards moves like queen c1, which he doesn't have the time for. It would be better just to bring the knight over right away. Okay, so he decides to trade off my bishop, which was the idea of queen c1, but then of course I get to keep the pawn a bit longer. So even after the bishop is gone, he tries to get the pawn back, but now all my pieces are ready to fire, and the second bishop needs to come alive, right? So far he's just been stuck there, but not anymore. So we bring him out to play, and they can't hold the center much longer, right? So if they try something like this, I'm happy to take and win the pawn, either right now or later on, right? The pawn is very lonely here. I have to be a little bit careful of some pins, but those are just tricks, right? And tricks are for kids, as we say. So in the actual game, he decides to take, and my bishop is becoming the new dragon. He used to be the baby dragon, now he's the real dragon, okay? So we take back and all my pieces are coming alive, right? They may have a better pawn structure. Their pawns are a little bit healthier. My pawns are a little sick if they're doubled over here, and maybe I'll have more pawn islands, right? Even my king is not doing great, but his pieces over here aren't doing great either, right? They're not having a good time, so I'm allowed to live with these pawns and start using my piece activity. So he tries to break all my pawns even more. And I could take, even that's possible, but then maybe knight takes c4. It will be complicated, right? It's not so clear. Although black is fine because this bishop is just so amazing, he makes up for any bad pawns. But I got another idea around this point because the f4 square seemed awfully weak, right? So I said, what if we jump into there since my bishop is helping out, my queen's helping out, all the pieces, including this Rukon of Fate, are jumping into the game very harmoniously. So I thought, that's even better than taking on a5. Who needs these pawns anyways? All right, so he goes for 94, and we jump into our favorite outpost. Finally, we get to the bishop. Finally, we can get to d3. And we're also dreaming of some moves like d5, because if we get to play d5 and keep the pawn, heaven save white. It's not going to be easy, right? Just to give you an example, um, let's say they play something like this. I was even thinking about pushing d5 anyways, giving him the pawn and letting him have the bishop because my pawn chain is so nice here, right? And if he takes, let's say I even take the bishop and just take back on b7, that looks pretty nice to me, right? Even if material is equal, okay, black should be a little better because this pawn is weak, my pawns are more promising than his pawns here, right? And my pieces are going to be more promising too, unless he can somehow blockade these guys very quickly. But if he tries to blockade like this, the first thing that comes into my mind without thinking, just intuitively, we have to remove that knight. We can't let him stay in this world. So after he's gone, it'll be a lot easier to pick on these pawns, to bring our knight to a godly outpost on d3, maybe even f4, and only black can be better here. Okay. So in the actual game, he went for bishop f3, which is a bit of a blunder, but it's not easy to recommend moves for him, right? So we jump into this great, fabulous outpost and start collecting. Around here, I start realizing that maybe I am winning this game, which is very hard to fathom because up to this point, every opportunity I had somehow went wrong. So I thought there is no way I could get the title in this game. I should be happy with a draw. But when we got to this point, I thought with an extra pawn and such knights, things are looking up. Maybe I can't mess up this game after all. So he picks up the pawn, we collect on e5, and with such glorious knights, it becomes very hard to play for Jose. I could play knight f4 right away. Instead, I bring the queen, and the last thing I want to show you in this game is this pretty little queen trap that could have happened because the rook actually doesn't want to be on e1. She's getting in the way of the queen, and the queen needed that square. Perhaps the queen should run back here, come what may. At least she won't get trapped like she would in this variation. The pretty thing here is that the queen is running short on squares, right? So let's say the rook goes away. Can you guys take 3 seconds and find a way to punish this whole contraption for white? Okay. If your punishment included d5, you're on the right track. So it turns out the queen is running out of squares, and after something like knight g3, this is a beautiful queen trap. It doesn't happen very often that we catch her in the middle of the board like this, okay? And all the squares are taken. Sorry, queen, not your day. In the actual game, Jose realized that and went for g3, but then my glorious knights got to gallop all the way into his house and collect an extra exchange. The game lasted a lot longer and went into time trouble, but this was the exciting part where I got the advantage and ultimately won. Okay, so that being said, later on, a few rounds later, I was playing Tomas Sosa, this Argentinian grandmaster, and at that point, I was just super happy. Life was great. And I thought, let's try playing and let's try to play for the win because there is nothing to lose, anyways. So that's why I want to show you this game. And we'll fast forward through the opening because it's not too interesting. We start with this little close Sicilian. Um, I have a friend, shout out to Kusha Jafarian, who always likes to play this bishop b5 Sicilian. So I thought, let's try it out. Let's see what happens. So we go for this interesting line with knight takes d4. And the point is that black's pawns are not so great. And the bishop, even if it comes to g7, is going to be staring at these pawns for a long time. So it's not quite the dragon bishop we saw in the last game. All right. So we castle, they kick us away. I don't want to play here right away because I want to keep the pawn pinned as long as possible. And even when the bishop comes out, we have time to overprotect e4, and the bishop can't fire all the way, right? So both bishops are a little blunted. They can't see the light of day. Now, black should probably aim for d5 and try to break down this center. If they manage to trade off a pawn or two, then, first of all, they don't have double pawns. And second, the bishops will burn on this long diagonal, burn a hole through my king side at least, right? So my plan is also pretty simple. I need to get my queen out of here, either on h4 or g3, and then trade off one of the bishops. Probably the dark square guy, because of all the holes in the king's palace. If we can trade off the fianchetto bishop, then the king may regret those holes. So that was my idea. The knight came out. And here's an interesting choice that was made. So I could go for f4, right? That's the human move, the usual move. But here, it's not like f5 is easy to get, right? The bishop is a bit sad. They just blocked his eyes. And we're not even getting the usual fun stuff with f5, f6 because they have simply too many friends here. All right, so I didn't really like this position. It didn't look that promising, and my light squares after something like d5. If I have to take, then this is very sad, right? And if I have to push, then the knight is very happy. So I wasn't sure about this position. I said, let's be modest. Just put the pawn on f3. My queen will come out later. My bishop will come out later. Those dark squares are starting to tell, and that bishop will never come out and hurt me. So we're keeping it solid, keeping it safe. Okay. This move I'm not a big fan of. So Thomas is trying to stop me from trading the bishop. But now that pawn will get in his way for the rest of the game. Okay. So my bishop is jumping into some squares. I'm dreaming about knight c6, bishop d6, for example, and then good luck castling, right? If he has to play this, I'm pretty happy. And even if he doesn't play it, for example, d6, then I have the time to look into queen g3, right? My queen can come to h3 to keep him from castling. So that pawn's always a problem, okay? Now, in the actual game, Thomas went for e5, which kind of shocked me because I always thought you can't do that. You can't open up my bishop like that. So this is really a battle of bishops, and his just got some bad news, right? That he's not coming into play, and mine just got some excellent news because he never thought he'd do anything, and now he is doing a lot on that f7 square and the whole diagonal. So I go back, I keep some squares under control here, and that pawn inside as well. He goes for d5, trying to block off my bishop, but that guy can't stay here forever, right? It's hard to maintain the pawn there. So I maintain the pawn on h6 and say, how are you ever castling? If h5, then how are those squares looking? I wonder how your knight is faring here. Not so great, right? Already we're aiming at this pawn. If they take, we're super happy. Christmas came early this year, right? But if they don't take, I can take that knight and win the pawn, okay? So he tries to break the pin, which is understandable, but the king is the real problem here. I could even start with f4 right away, but I said, wait a second, my rook is not working. Let's fix it. Okay. So I say hi to the pawn. The pawn has to go forward because otherwise my rook will invade. And we cut him off from his friend. So the friends can never talk again. Okay. That guy's a permanent weakness. And the queen is tied down to a little servant on b4. That's not her dream job. Okay. So he tries to bring the rook in, so at least the rook can babysit the pawn instead. But here comes the caveman on the f file. All right, the caveman throws the spear, and we're firing all the way at f7, while the king can't get out of there. There's nowhere for him to run. Okay, if he tries to run there, I'm always happy to take and start collecting pawns. Now, he decides to take, and maybe taking here is better. It's hard to suggest anything at this point because black's pieces are suffering. So he takes, and I'm happy to kick away the queen. There is this little problem, so we go back to avoid any forks and say hi to all the targets. He goes back, and now we need to bring in the last piece, right? Before doing anything, bring in the last soldiers. No soldier left behind. Okay. The rook is in the party. Now we can start the fireworks when everything is ready. He tries to get out of there in castle by defending the h-pawn, but that makes more problems. The consequences are these squares, so I'm happy to jump in. Okay, he finally castles, connecting the rooks, but it's a bit late, and that f5 square is juicy. We just need to land something on it. How about the knight? That's where the knights belong, such beautiful outposts. Okay, he tries to keep everything connected and safeguard the pawn, but now we can open the game. Okay, take 3 seconds to try and find the winning breakthrough for white, because here I thought for quite a bit many things look tempting, right? I can drop my knight there, try to push, even e5 looked very tempting. I can take back with the pawn, take back with the rook. All of it looks tempting. All of it makes sense. H4, H4 not yet because the knight is hanging, but in the future it's coming. Okay? Many things look tempting, but only one way is just clearly winning. Okay, so take a second, you can pause the video and see if you can find the breakthrough. That breakthrough happens to be takes, and already whatever they take with, if they take back, they're in big trouble. For example, here we have, okay, so knight takes, we have this simple idea of boom, wherever the queen goes, we get the piece, right? So takes, and boom, we win the queen. Even if they go here, I think, okay, we can just start collecting pawns, right? So that's not going to work. And if the bishop takes, we have the all-important idea of takes, right? And then if the bishop takes knight f5, jumping in, that bishop doesn't matter anymore. We don't care about him. What we care about is the king side. If the queen goes here, I can just take because it opens the way for our rook. And that's an extra piece for us. Okay, so this is just winning on the spot because of tactics and the weak king side, right? He decides to go back, and now we need to strike while the iron is hot. Yeah, while everything's going our way, we need to attack. If the knight gets here, he's worth his weight in gold. So the easiest way to get him there is to remove the guard. That knight, for us, is worth at least a rook. Kaboom, right? Remove the guard, and now he's gone. Land the gold mine. Okay, so we got the golden knight on f5, and we're breaking in. He tries to keep everything protected, but the queen is not all powerful. She can't do everything, and now we can simply break through, right? H4, kicking the pawn. If they take, boom, discovered attack wins the queen. Okay, so King h7 instead, keeping everything sort of protected, but already he has to give up at least a pawn. He's up in exchange, but the extra rook is not felt here, right? Doesn't feel like an extra rook. He tries to trade off the queens. Of course, we're not interested, but we're interested in targets like the unprotected rook. The problem with moves like bishop e8 is they break coordination. And once the coordination's broken, it takes a while to fix everything, and all the tactics go against black here. Okay, he tries to fix his rook coordination, but we collect, right? So we don't want to take with pawn and block the file. We want to keep that file open. And if they take here, not pawn takes, but rook will take and finish the job. Okay, that's why he tries to block the rook's way and pushes the f pawn, getting the bishop into play. But now we can simply exploit the king. He's running out of safe squares, right? The h file is ours, and that's not exactly his square either. All we need to do is remove his only guard on the light squares. If that bishop is gone, so is the king's chances in this world, right? So we kick away the rook, we forked the rook and bishop. I'm happy to trade that ugly bishop because of the remaining pieces, which are in my favor, right? The king is running out of squares. We open up the beautiful diagonal, and he can give up the rook. It won't really matter. At this point, it's too late. We just need to bring in the last attacker. And look at these diagonals. Just cutting through the position like a knife through butter, right? They have to give away at least a rook for the king's life, but that's basically an eternal pin. They won't be able to get out of this pin. The king can't move, right? These guys are all stuck. So we bring in the queen to finish the job. They can only wait. Thomas can't really do anything in the meantime while we improve the pieces. That's the punching bag. We need to punch the punching bag, pin and win. Once we got the punching bag in place, that rook can't move. right? Not much they can do. Queen is stuck. Bishop is stuck. The bishop had to go back. The king is stuck, most importantly, right? And I'm happy to even push g4 because if I take and the pawn comes here, I'm going to gallop all the way to f6 and collect the rook for free. Okay, of course, I'm not taking it for a bishop. The bishop is worth way more. Okay, so the queen runs away. We collect, and here I realized we could take on f5, but maybe there are some stalemate tricks I don't want to worry about. Instead, let's just checkmate in two, and that's what happened. You can imagine how happy I was, right? It doesn't happen every day that you can get to the strong player's king like this. So the main point of this game is really the coordination of the white pieces and the lack of coordination in black's camp, right? There were too many targets, and while black was defending everything, we were busy helping our pieces jump into godly squares like that night. Okay, so lots of exciting plans ahead now that we got the title. I'll be teaching a lot more. I'll be doing other things and helping with organizing tournaments, and that's all coming up. So keep and stay tuned. Okay, thanks for listening, and until next time, bye bye.